What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I'm going to be continuing my series where I give you my season predictions for this upcoming NHL season of 2021-2022. And for today's video, as we move along in the Atlantic Division, we're going to be covering the Montreal Canadiens. Now, entering last season, the Montreal Canadiens were coming off a season where they kind of finished around 500, but because of the pandemic, they were able to squeak into the playoffs because of the bubble with the 2014 format. And in those playoffs, they did pretty well, knocking out the Pittsburgh Penguins in the qualifying round, but ultimately falling to the Philadelphia Flyers in the technically first round in 6 games. But entering last season, they made a ton of upgrades that they really saw as potential for this team to maybe take the next step and become a legitimate Stanley Cup contender and be a very competitive team. Now, throughout the entire regular season, things were very rocky. As you can see here, they finished with a 24, 21, and 11 record for a total of 59 points, which was good enough to make the playoffs at 4th in the North Division. However, we can all agree that this regular season was very underwhelming for this Habs team as a team that just barely squeezed into the playoffs in what was considered by most relatively weaker division. However, once this team got into the playoffs, things just start to click, and this team ended up going all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals in an incredible Cinderella run. But ultimately, they did lose in the Stanley Cup Finals to the Tampa Bay Lightning in 5 games, who ended up going back-to-back. Now, taking a look at their stats over the course of the season, they averaged a 2.82 goals for per game, which ranked 17th, and a 19.2% power play percentage, which was tied for 17th in the league. Looking at their defensive stats, their goals against was at 2.95, which ranked 18th in the league, and they also had a 78.5% penalty kill percentage, which was tied for 23rd. So looking at these stats, very middle of the pack, below average even, just very underwhelming. Now, taking a look at their top 5 scorers, their leading scorer being Tyler Toffoli, who in 52 games scored 28 goals and 16 assists for 44 points. Now, Toffoli had an amazing first year in Montreal with the goal scoring pace he was on. Now, I'm not sure if he can replicate that next season, but still, he definitely found a home, and it looks like he's going to be a key piece to this team moving forward, and he's on a bargain of a contract. And second, we have Jeff Petrie, who scored 12 goals and 30 assists for 42 points in 55 games. I mean, Jeff Petrie, for the production he had in just 55 games, you could say that he really took his game to a whole nother level as one of the better defensemen in the league. And third, we have Nick Suzuki, had a very solid sophomore season in 56 games, 15 goals, and 26 assists for 41 points. In a place like Montreal, where there's always a ton of question marks in terms of their scoring, especially down the middle, Nick Suzuki is the lone key piece that is confident and consistent as ever for this Habs team, and he looks like he's going to be the #1 center for this team moving forward. In fourth, we have Thomas Tatar, who had a bit of a disappointing year, 50 games, 10 goals, 20 assists for 30 points. Tatar's first 2 seasons with Montreal were actually very solid. His first year, he put up 25 goals, 58 points. He fit in right at home, coming from Vegas, where, he wasn't really used a ton. And then his second season, he led the team in scoring. He had a 61-point season in 68 games. However, this third year with the team, which ultimately is his last, did not play super well, and he was scratched for the majority of the Stanley Cup playoffs as a result. We have a 2-way tie for 5th, first being Josh Anderson, who had 17 goals and 7 assists for 24 points in 52 games. Now, Anderson's play style definitely fits the Habs' need as a guy with size and speed. They really need, bigger guys on that team because they're a little bit small throughout their lineup, especially up front. Overall, I do think Anderson is a very solid piece for this team, very decent goal scorer. He did have some issues with consistency throughout the year, but all around, decent player. And also there was Philip Deneau, who in 53 games had 5 goals and 19 assists for 24 points as well. Now, Deneau is coming off back-to-back 50-plus point seasons, so for the production he had this past season, a little bit disappointing. But I guess we all know that he's more of a defensive center, doesn't have a ton of offensive upside in him, but at the same time, he was definitely capable of scoring a little bit more. Then in goal, we have the 2 goaltenders who are more of a tandem this season because Carrie Price had some injury issues. But for Price, 25 games, a 12-7-5 record with a 2.64 goals against average and a .901 save percentage. Obviously, you know that Carrie Price had a pivotal role in the Canadiens making it all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals. But in the regular season, like it's been the past few years, his play has really struggled. Look at that, .901 save percentage, pretty below average, honestly. And then Jake Allen, who in 29 games had 11-12-5 record with the 2.68 goals against average and a .907 save percentage. Now, you look at these numbers, and they don't necessarily pop out for you for Jake Allen, but at the same time, he had to stand on his head every time he stepped on the ice, and it was in goal for this team because the team was pretty atrocious throughout the regular season, and the defense was not all that great. They gave up a ton on 2-on-1s, And Jake Allen kept his team in a ton of games. And in my opinion, he's a key part as to why the Habs even made the playoffs. Because if he did not stay on his head, this team would not have even come close to the playoffs. I know that for a fact. Now, entering this season, I just feel like there's a ton up in the air right now in terms of where the Habs stand. I know a lot of people are overlooking this team and feel like they just went on a fluky run to the Stanley Cup Finals and they don't see this team as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender. And especially now they're going to be returning in the Atlantic Division, there's a lot of people who don't expect this team to even make the playoffs. And based on the additions and losses they had, you could have a little bit of an argument there. I mean, they did lose some pretty key pieces. Philip Deneau, for one, a key piece in the Habs run to the Stanley Cup Finals, very solid defensive center. That's going to be a hole down the middle, especially with the Jesperi Kotkaniemi situation. And by the way, at the recording of this video, I do not know if Jesperi Kotkaniemi is going to be matched by the Montreal Canadiens with that contract offer of $6.1 million, or if he's now officially a Carolina Hurricane. By the time of the release of this video, we will know that answer for sure. So depending on what happens there, they could be even thinner down the middle. And they also lost Thomas Tatar, who, albeit was not coming off a great year, was a very consistent winger for this team over the last few years. So that could be a key piece in terms of their scoring. But it looks like they did get a little bit of a replacement there. We'll talk about that. And they also lost Corey Perry, who was a very pivotal role in that bottom six for the Habs, Very solid piece, very sound defensively, just a winner, hard worker. That could be a key loss for them. And also I'll add that Shea Weber is not expected to play, so obviously being their captain, one of their better defensemen, another huge loss on that blue line. But in terms of what they added, I guess they added some decent pieces, one being David Savard, who's expected to replace Shea Weber on that defense. Now, albeit he's not going to replace Shea Weber, we all know that. He's not the player Shea Weber is, especially on offense. But defensively, he'd probably fill a decent role there. They also added Matthew Perreault, who, is a depth scorer, bottom six winger for the Winnipeg Jets. He's a guy who can move up and down your lineup. He's not going to contribute a ton offensively, but I feel like that's a decent piece, especially if the Habs struggle with injuries. He can be a guy that come in and step up and put up some decent numbers. And of course, the biggest signing probably would be Mike Hoffman. He's going to be a huge addition to that top six on the wing. He's a very proven 20-goal scorer at the very least, and he's very good on the power play. He is a power play specialist, and for a team that struggles on the power play, he should definitely help there. So yeah, I do have him as a playoff hopeful, even though they did make the finals last season. They're in a very tough division now, and they just really have to prove to everyone that they can hang with those amazing teams. If they can do that, they could potentially be back in the playoffs, but if not, it might be a very tough year for them to replicate. Well, maybe not, because they did have a mediocre regular season, but is mediocre going to be good enough to make the playoffs in the Atlantic Division and in the Eastern Conference? All right, so these are my top 5 scorers for the Montreal Canadiens next season. First, I have Nick Suzuki. I have him having a pretty big breakout season. 25 goals, 45 assists for 70 points. I really think he can hit 70 points, honestly. I just feel like every season he gets better and better, and now going to his 3rd season, now playing on the first line center role, I just feel like he's poised to have an amazing breakout season, taking on those first line center responsibilities. And I feel like he's a very solid playmaker, and he can create a ton of offense for all the goal scorers he has around him, Mike Hoffman, Cole Caufield, Tyler Toffoli, Josh Anderson. There's a lot of solid goal-scoring wingers on this team. Brendan Gallagher is another one, for example. Now, him being one of the primary playmakers on this team, I feel like he should rack up a pretty good amount of points. Now, am I overrating him maybe by having 70 points? Maybe that's a bit too high for most people's standards, but I really think he can hit that. I feel like this guy has a pretty high ceiling. I just don't think it's too outlandish to assume given the pretty solid goal scoring talent he has around him. Then in second, I'm going to go with Mike Hoffman here actually. 33 goals, 29 assists for 62 points. Now I know some people might think Toffoli's going to lead the team in goals again. Some might say Cole Caufield's going to have an amazing rookie year, maybe lead the team in goals, have over 30. But for me, I'm going to go off the board a little bit. I'm going to predict that Hoffman is going to lead the team in goals. Maybe that's a bit of a hot take, but I honestly believe he is the perfect fit for this team. He's a perennial 20-goal scorer at the very least, and I can see him hitting over 30, especially in that power play role. He should rack up a ton of goals on this team. He also has a ton of playmakers he can play with. Suzuki could feed him the puck on the power play. Maybe Drouin is a very solid playmaking option for him. Who knows? Now, in my video about the Blues, I did mention that he was kind of sheltered a ton. He was playing third-line minutes for the majority of his time there. Wasn't really used in the power play a whole lot. I feel like with Montreal, a team that struggles, he's going to get a ton of opportunity. And I just feel like he'll be used correctly here because they need guys like him to score, especially on the power play. And he's done it in the past, so I feel like this is just the perfect scenario for him. and that's why I think he's going to lead the team in goals. And third, I'm going to go with Tyler Toffoli, having a pretty solid year, 28 goals, 25 assists for 53 points. Now, obviously, last year was a career year in terms of his goal scoring. He was scoring at over a 40-goal pace. I don't think he scores at that rate again, but I still think he should score at least 20 goals because, over the course of his career, he has shown that he's a perennial 20-goal scorer. But I figured, maybe Montreal's a good fit for him. It's possible he challenges for 30, but I just feel like maybe 40-goal pace is a bit too high for next season, but you never know, I guess. And then fourth, I'm going to go with the rookie Cole Caufield, scoring 27 goals and 22 assists for a very solid 49 points. We all know that Cole Caufield's a very solid talent. In terms of his goal scoring, I think he's going to be, in the future, maybe a perennial 40-goal scorer. I really see that potential in him. I definitely feel like him and Suzuki have, kind of built a little bit of chemistry, especially in the playoffs. So I feel like as a rookie, he can hover around 50 points. I don't think that's too outlandish to assume. Again, I can definitely see him popping off and completely throwing my expectations out the window. Maybe he does a lot better than I'm predicting. But for right now, I think I'm being pretty level-headed with this prediction. Like I said in my Ducks video, I do think Trevor Zegras is going to win the Calder, but I definitely think Caufield will be a finalist for that Calder trophy. And in fifth, I have Jeff Petrie scoring 12 goals and 36 assists for 48 points. Now, over the last few years, Jeff Petrie has really taken his game to another level in terms of his offense. He's the number one D-man on this team officially now, and he puts up points year in and year out. I see no reason why he shouldn't do that again, especially being the guy who's going to be relied on heavily to produce offense from that blue line, because apart from him, there's no other option right now. Getting into what my expectations are for the Habs this season. Now, as a Habs fan, it does pain me to say this, but objectively speaking, I do think my expectations are quite a bit lower for this team. They're in a very tough division in the Atlantic, and I just don't know if they're good enough to make the playoffs. So with that, I have them fifth in the Atlantic Division with a 42-33-7 record, for a total of 91 points, and that's not going to be good enough to make the playoffs, especially in the Eastern Conference. Now, at 91 points, I don't think this is a bad team by any means. I don't think it's as bad as some people think, but I also don't think it's as good as some people think based on their Stanley Cup final run. I feel like they will be in the thick of things until the end of the season in terms of their playoff race, but being in that tougher Atlantic Division where the teams are very top-heavy, the Tampa Bay Lightning, the Boston Bruins, the Florida Panthers, the Toronto Maple Leafs, it's going to be tough for this team to hold their own, I think. Also, I question with their consistency in goal, Carrie Price, great in the playoffs, but what are we going to get from him in the regular season, He's still got it. Obviously, he's still proven that he's a very good goaltender in this league, but until he shows that he can play really well in the regular season, it's hard for me to predict that this team is a playoff team. And also, they're inexperienced down the middle. Losing Philip Deneau is a huge loss, and especially if Jesperi Kotkaniemi does not come back. This is a big hole in that center position. Outside of Nick Suzuki, who's their second line center? After recording this video, I have no idea. Even with that, you look at the rest of their centers, it's relatively inexperienced. I mean, Paquette is like a veteran, but he's likely slotted in your fourth line. Jake Evans, he's relatively young. Ryan Poehling, if he comes in this upcoming season, he's still relatively young as well. And of course, Nick Suzuki only being, 21, 22 years old. It's just very inexperienced down the middle. And, that stuff just tells me that they're not quite ready to be a playoff team. They're still very young in most positions, but they also have a lot of key veterans. So to me, I would say they're kind of sort of in the middle of nowhere, although they definitely could make the playoffs in the Atlantic because there is a ton of teams that I do have a little bit of question marks for. But, I probably wouldn't bet my money on it, to be honest. As painful as it is for me to say, I'm trying not to be biased here. As a Habs fan, I try to be as objective as possible when I'm making these rankings and these season previews. And for Montreal, I just don't see them as a playoff team. They're in a tough division. It's going to be a tough year, maybe. Or maybe not. We'll see. Hopefully they do play really well and make the playoffs, but I'm going to keep my expectations slightly lower. So that's going to wrap up my season expectations on the Montreal Canadiens this season. Love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. You think they're in for a tough year being in a tough Atlantic Division like I do? Or do you see them as a criminally underrated team and maybe they can prove that the Stanley Cup Finals run was not a fluke and they actually could be a playoff team in this Atlantic Division? Again, let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching. Click like if you like this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel and I'll talk to you in the next one. See you guys later.